with me. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable to you, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. This morning's Old Testament reading, the healing of Naaman, is a story where everything is done all wrong. First of all, Elisha heals the wrong person. Naaman is an enemy. And he's not just any enemy. Naaman is the commander of the army of the king of Aram, a neighboring country that is regularly at war with Israel. Notice, in fact, there is a young Israelite girl living in Naaman's house, and the narrator makes a point to tell us that the Arameans took her captive on one of Naaman's raids of Israel. Taking young girls captive and making them slaves in your house? Naaman is not a nice guy. He is public enemy number one, Israel's most wanted, and it sounds like he might be a human trafficker. Why on earth does Elisha heal this guy? This is all wrong. Second, Elisha heals Naaman in the wrong way. Naaman is a big man in Aram, so he expects a big welcome when he gets to the prophet's house. But Elisha does not even come to the door to greet him. Instead, he sends a messenger to tell Naaman what to do. Go and wash 7 times in the Jordan, and you shall be clean. This response makes Naaman very angry. And even as we've established that he's not a nice guy, and now we're learning he's got a bit of an ego, we can understand why he's upset, right? He has traveled all this way into enemy territory, and then Elisha can't even be bothered to come to the door? That's rude, Elisha. Surely your mother raised you better than that. And then the instructions the messenger relays to Naaman are somewhat ludicrous. Go and wash in the Jordan 7 times. Now, I have been to the Jordan River, and let me tell you, it hardly deserves to be called a river. It's much more like a very muddy creek. So Naaman is right when he says, this is ridiculous. Aren't the rivers in Damascus, where I come from, better than this dinky little river in Israel? But more than that, Naaman has leprosy, a lifelong skin disease. He is here seeking healing from a prophet he's been told can help him. He didn't come all the way to Israel for a bath. And then, when he is healed, Naaman's response to the healing is all wrong. He stands before Elisha. He tries to shower him with lavish gifts, and he confesses his faith in the God of Israel. That's good. And then, in a comical gesture, he asks Elisha to take home 2 mule loads of Israel's dirt with him, so that he can worship Israel back home, or worship Israel's God back home in Aram. Many in this time believed that gods were tied to the lands of their peoples, so Naaman thinks if he is to be a worshiper of Israel's God, he will have a better time doing it if he transports home some Israelite soil. Which makes me want to say, hey Naaman, if you want to worship Israel's God, did you ever think about maybe, I don't know, not waging war anymore against God's people and then taking their children captive? Just a thought. But no, is the answer. That did not occur to Naaman. Within 2 chapters, the Israelites and the Arameans are back at war, and the status quo goes on. This is a fascinating story, isn't it? Everything is done all wrong. And yet in the end, Naaman is healed and God is worshipped. And somehow, this story makes it into the scriptures, into a book that future generations will come to call the Bible, the gospel, the good news. I mean, you didn't need to buy a ticket. I hope no one did. An enemy general gets his healing, even after throwing a hissy fit about it. And then life continues as usual. Is this story good news? Even stranger, perhaps, than the story itself is the fact that Jesus uses Naaman as an example in his very first sermon. We heard that sermon a moment ago. Jesus is preaching at the synagogue in Nazareth, his hometown. It's the inauguration speech for his ministry. And he tells the story of Naaman as a word of caution. Speaking to friends, family, proud neighbors who have watched him grow up, he says, don't expect, just because I'm one of you, that you're going to like the gospel I preach. Remember, there were plenty of lepers in Israel that needed healing, and yet Elisha the prophet chose to heal Naaman, the commander of the enemy army. The people of Nazareth get it, and they don't appreciate the story. Just like Naaman himself, they are enraged. They decide that Jesus too is all wrong, and the attentive congregation turns into an angry mob that drives Jesus out of town and tries to throw him off a cliff. Maybe they would have been happier if they had Robert Earl Keen background music, but that's another story. The story sure doesn't sound like good news, does it? Naaman's story confronts us with the hard truth that sometimes the grace of God is downright offensive. It defies our expectations. The grace of God offends our sense of morality, our understanding of how the world works. God's grace is too inclusive, too radical, too persistent. Sometimes we see God's grace at work in the world, and all we can say is, that's not fair, God. And if you ask me, I disagree. And yet this hard truth may also be the good news. That when everything is all wrong, the grace of God comes anyway. Grace that thwarts and exceeds our expectations. Grace that is utterly dependent on God and not one drop dependent on us. No matter what we do, no matter how dark our world gets, God refuses to stop showing up. And maybe this is the good news that we need right now, because so much in our world is going all wrong. This week has left many in our Taos community suddenly staring into an abyss, and they don't know what's on the other side. Many of our neighbors, some of us, are wondering what will happen to food assistance and health insurance. All of us are worried about what will happen to our hospital. Parents in Texas are searching desperately for children who have been washed away by floods. Meanwhile, children in Gaza continue to starve. Friends, this world we live in is not the world as God intended it. There is plenty of reason to despair in the world. This we know full well. But the good news of this difficult story is that God God's grace is relentless and shows up anyway. Not where or how we expect it, perhaps. It might show up in an enemy, in a muddy creek, in a piece of bread or a sip of juice, in a bath, in a song sung or piped into the sanctuary, a word whispered, a hug or a squeeze of the hand, in a meal cooked, a sign made, a child comforted, a leper healed. We don't get to choose where and how that grace shows up. All we get to choose is whether or not we receive it, and whether or not we will respond to God's call to participate in that grace. God's grace refuses to be tamed by our expectations and desires, which is a little infuriating, and yes, surely it is offensive. But that grace just will not stop showing up. Healing comes. Goodness comes. Love comes. No matter what. Even when everything is all